believe we're at 11:01. We'll get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. So far we have 42 people. I know we've got at least double that registered and a lot of people that are going to be able to watch the recording later. Thank you all for joining us. As you know, the National Stewardship Action Council advocates for an equitable circular economy. And we do that through EPR and other policy tools. And today we're very excited to have a great lineup of panelists to talk about household hazardous waste and EPR and how we can use that tool to reduce costs and increase convenient collection for our citizens. So we want to thank our friends at NAMA, the National Association of Hazardous Materials Manager, for co-hosting this webinar with us. And thanks to all of our NAMA friends who joined the webinar as well. So next slide, please. And this is today's panelist. I'm going to go ahead and first turn it over to Senator Catherine Blakespear. She is from Encinitas down in Southern California in San Diego County. She is a great champion of waste, well, I don't want to see waste, resource management issues. And she's on a time schedule that's tight, as you can imagine, this time of year, busy legislative season. And we wanted to give her the floor because she is the author of our bill on EPR for explosive marine flares, which a lot of you have a lot of deep interest in. We're going to have a panel on that Monday, which we'll be promoting at the end of this webinar. But I wanted to give her some space to welcome everybody and speak to you for just a minute. So we'll go ahead and Senator Blakespear, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Heidi. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Catherine Blakespear, and this is my second year. I'm just starting my second year in the State Senate. And one of the bills I'm most excited about is this bill, SB 1066. And the idea came to me from Heidi and the interest and the leadership that we've seen for many years from the National Stewardship Action Council. And so I'm really excited to be carrying this bill. I come from local government and I served as the mayor of my city of Encinitas, and I was on the Regional Solid Waste Association board. So I developed an interest through that in recycling and waste management. And we know that hazardous waste is a particular area that really has lacked the attention that it deserves for a really long time. So I know that this is a particular interest for Heidi, and having one area, which is marine flares, dealt with in this one bill, I think is really important. I represent a coastal community, so people are aware of the fact that when they have a boat and they don't know what to do with their expired marine flares, sometimes they are put into the ocean or they're dropped off at local governments who then have, like fire departments, that then have to deal with them. And so having this extended producer responsibility, which would make the producers of the marine flares have to fund and operate the collection program. That is what the bill requires. So, of course, it's all in the details, and those are details that we're working out. What exactly is the collection program, and how frequent is it, and where is it located, or how many different places is it? So I'm excited about this bill, and it's moved through its first couple committees, and hopefully we'll get off the Senate floor and then move over to the Assembly. So I'm eager to do more bills like this one, and I am open if you would ever like to reach out to my office. So it's Senator Catherine Blakespear, and I'm in the California State Senate, and I'm easy to find on the internet. So thank you again, Heidi, for inviting me to say a few words, and I'm really excited that all of you are here today and for the enthusiasm about this topic. Oh, we can't hear you, Heidi, you're mute.
Sorry, I want to say thank you so much, Senator Blakespear, for being here and for being a leader and a champion. I always say, I just did a keynote in Michigan on Wednesday, and I always start by saying, if you're going to run a bill, you've got to find a great political champion, and you're a great political champion for these issues of materials management. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So now we will go ahead and move on. And as you can see, we have other amazing panelists. Our friends and co-sponsors of the marine flare bills, Leslie Lukacs with Zero Waste Sonoma, also very active in SB 1143, our HHW EPR bill, which we're going to talk about today, carried by Senator Ben Allen. Also a great champion of the circular and equitable economy. And we're going to have our guests, Josh and Shannon from Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, that brave little state was the first to pass EPR for household hazardous waste. So we're very eager to hear from them. And then our friend Manny Chung from Product Care. And Product Care is the producer-run organization up in Canada, and they handle a lot of household hazardous waste EPR programs. So we are very excited about the panel today. And I'd like to just share, please put any comments or questions in the chat. We will not take them until the very end, because I want to make sure we get through all the presentations, and then we'll go ahead and go back and answer questions and so forth. So next slide, please. So if you haven't heard already, we have two organizations. We have a C4, which can do the lobbying and advocacy. That's the National Stewardship Action Council. That's where the action comes in. And then the Stewardship Action Foundation, which is the C3 arm, which does the education and outreach projects to support our advocacy work. So if you're a government and you wish to join us, we'd invite you to join the Stewardship Action Foundation. That's the safest thing. And if not, and you're a company and another, we'd love to have you join NSAC and help support this work. It's very difficult and it takes a lot of funding. And we're always, as you know, raising money to try and keep doing this work. So if you like what we're doing, please donate and join us now. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over quickly what we see as a circular economy. It's based on three principles. We truly follow Ellen MacArthur's Foundation's definition, which means we first design waste and pollution out of the system. With hazardous products, these are the most important to design waste and pollution out. And whether that's a chemical or a product, this is what I'm most concerned about. And we just went to a MRF down in Galt that is literally got a hazardous waste facility on site, even though all they process is blue bin recyclables. They pulled 183,000 pounds of household hazardous waste out of recyclables last year alone at a cost of over $150,000. That's just one facility. So we've got immense leakage of dangerous products and chemicals that are ending up in the trash and the recycling and elsewhere. We really need to turn off that spigot. And the only way to do that, that I know of, outside of bans, is to get the producer to pay for the end of life costs, because that makes them rethink design. And then it's keeping the products and materials in motion. So whether it's organics or man-made products, and they shouldn't cross, because that's pollution. And then going back and regenerating the natural systems that we've harmed. And we've harmed pretty much all of them. In fact, they just did a survey off the ocean and found literally no plankton and lots of microplastics. So we're in serious trouble on a lot of levels. Time to take action. But we've got to decouple economic activity from consumption of finite resources. And this is the best way we know of to do it. Next slide, please. So our track record of success is pretty amazing, quite frankly. We have a team of 3 and we partner with everybody else. We love partnerships and allies. And we've done everything from update and correct the program for carpet twice. We've had to do cleanup, and now we're on the 3rd. That's a long story, but that's a good story about making sure you get your EPR right. And then medicines and needles, flushable wipes, truth in labeling, mercury thermostat update to the program, and even banning mercury lighting because we don't need it anymore. Why are we putting mercury in glass and selling it to the public? That's kind of crazy. So we need to stop that. And we're pleased that other states are following. We've also done an update to the state's aqua toxicity tests and hope that the DTSC will upgrade that to a mathematical equation instead of poisoning fish, which is costly, expensive, and cruel in my opinion. And then also truth in marketing on vaping devices. They were labeling them as disposable, and they are not. And then, of course, we helped negotiate SB 54, the big Packaging Producer Responsibility Act that also turns the spigot off on plastic pollution with real source reduction and going back to real reuse and refill numbers. We're very, very proud of that. And it's truly the only true circular economy bill I know of in the world that did all 3 of those things that we talked about: turning off the spigot, keeping materials in motion, and repairing natural systems with a mitigation fund for cleanup. Next slide, please. So the policy tools we've talked about, there's different policy tools, and we look at, each product and category differently as to which policy tool we're going to use. Sales bans, like we did on mercury lighting, well, we have a safe alternative, LEDs on the market that last even longer and are more durable. So why would we keep selling glass filled with mercury? That doesn't make sense. Making sure the labels are right so the public knows what they're buying and they know where to put it at end of life. The right to repair is very important for durability. Product stewardship, which is the paint care program, and other programs that are visible fees like carpet. But EPR to us is the internalized cost of doing business, where the producers truly directly pay for the end of life of their product and set up the system and manage it with oversight and enforcement by government. And then, of course, you can use deposits if you want to increase collection. So one of the questions we always ask is, one of the policy tools we're using is, how toxic is it? Because that's one of the triggers for us to think about a ban. But there's no safe alternative for a lot of the products in the hazardous waste category. So lamps was an exception. So what do we do with these things? EPR is a great tool. Next slide, please. So with paint care, we're very pleased to see how many states have that paint stewardship program. When I first started in this field and I was consulting to the Product Stewardship Institute and working on the paint dialogue that led to the bills getting passed, California having the first program, helping pass that bill in 2012. Look at all the states that have passed it now. And it's very exciting. They're expanding their program. In California, we expanded to cover aerosol cans last year. And now we're looking at all HHW that's left over from the existing programs, which we're going to talk about SB 1143 today. But it's very exciting to see, and hopefully many other states will look to address paint soon. And that's about half of your household hazardous waste bill, usually. Next slide, please. And I want to thank Paint Care because they've now collected over 70 million cans. They promote reuse. In fact, a lot of reuse is happening because they're inspiring that with an incentive payment to local governments to create paint swaps. The reuse rate was 4% in 2023. And they also do large volume pickups for large construction sites and other facilities. So thanks again to Paint Care. They've been really nice to work with, and I really appreciate their team. But hopefully more states can look at this. Next slide, please. Now, in California, SB 1143 that we're going to talk about, the HHW EPR bill, is only covering products in this category that do not have an existing program. These are products that are already under either an EPR or have been banned. So ag pesticide containers, recalled products like the lead painted lunch boxes, which is what inspired that bill in 2008. Mercury thermostats we have under EPR. We were key in passing that. I was at CPSC in 2008. Medications and needles, which NSAC was immensely involved with. Loose batteries, which passed in 2022, along with battery embedded products and electronics, and then the mercury lighting ban. But the other products categories that are not EPR are the government run programs for electronics in California, oil and tires. So those are not going to be covered with this bill. It will only cover what's left. And we've done some things, but we're tired of this product by product approach. It's going to take forever. So we'd really like to get one pro for the rest of them. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, and the senator is the incredible author of this bill for the marine flare disposal. It's one of 3 explosive categories that we all deal with in hazardous waste, household hazardous waste. Marine flares, ammunition, and fireworks are the most common explosives that we see. They all have a problem, but marine flares, because they're on the ocean and boaters have to replace them every 42 months. That's required by law. And so it's only for the Great Lakes and the ocean is where they're required, not on all the inland waters. They have to have a place to go, and people literally have no place for them. So we've heard real stories from real people that they've thrown them in the water. They have blown them up on 4th of July. They have dissolved them in 5-gallon buckets and dumped the water into the trash can or the marina. They just don't, they've blown them up in the desert. They don't know what to do. So they do a lot of bad things, but we haven't provided them with the options. So we're talking now with boating and waterways and safety officer, boating officers of California. The manufacturer Orion is really the only manufacturer selling in the United States to the leisure boat market. But these are literally pictures of what we've seen show up outside of Coast Guard offices, fire departments, and they even get buried in HHW. We've seen. Next slide, please. So the bill, we would love, anybody wants to support, we'd love it. Again, it's co-sponsored with Zero Waste Sonoma, and it's the first in the nation. We have a webinar on Monday we're going to tell you about, and hopefully you can all join. But this is a big problem that is national, and we really hope to get support from Orion and others. We're having a call with them next Thursday, which we're excited about, to try and figure out how to solve this. Next slide, please. And again, the costs can be outrageous. We've seen as high as $185 a flare, but we've also seen as low as $10.55 a flare. So it just depends on the system that's set up, and we want an efficient system. We don't want this to be too expensive for the boaters, but we do need these costs covered. Next slide, please. And we've gotten out of 2 committees. There's videos there. You can watch them. I think it was stellar. Jordan did an amazing job, as did our partners in Sonoma, to get lots of support for these bills, and very interesting comments from some of the committee members, including it's not a great argument to say that boaters can't afford it or won't pay it if the price even doubles, because if at $15 they double to $30, it saves your life in your boat. I don't think that is going over well with the legislators. So interesting video if you'd like to watch it. Next slide, please. Now, the supporters are very long, as I said. And again, there's a coalition letter if you would like to support it. And we will be sending these out to everybody who attended today, so you don't need to write all this down or take a picture. Next slide, please. So we do have 3 opponents, and we're working with all of them, talking with them for months, and we'll continue to do that. We want to collaborate and find a solution. And there's lots of, this is an onion issue, I call it, lots of layers. We can't fix probably every layer with the bill, but we can really make it a running start. Next slide, please. So again, if you'd like to join us on the webinar on Monday specific to that bill, the QR code is to the right. You can just go ahead and put your camera up to it and register right now. And we'll hope to see you there. Next slide, please. Gas cylinders. That is one of the bills that's in the legislature in California right now. Only Connecticut has done this before us. They did do an EPR bill. We're glad for that. But we're now on the 3rd bill in California on gas cylinders. And I've looked way back at hazardous waste, what we're seeing in facilities. Gas cylinders is always a major problem because they're a compressed tank and they need to be punctured, evacuated, crushed, and shipped. That's a lot of energy for hot rolled steel to carry a quarter's worth of gas. And we would like to see this go to a refillable and drive to the refillable market as quickly as we can for this huge GHG footprint package. You can see on the right some of the cages that they have up in Canada to recycle and collect those at parks. But we really hope this passes this year, but if it doesn't in California, they will be pulled into the HHW bill. Next slide, please. We also have all these other hazardous wastes like clean tech, solar panels, and EV batteries. Those both have bills this year in California. We haven't seen the final version of either yet, so you can watch them and see how they are progressing if you're interested in those 2 products. That's SB 615 by Senator Ben Allen and AB 2 by Assemblymember Ward. Next slide, please. So SB 1143 by Senator Ben Allen. This is the one I've wanted to do for literally, it's actually the first bill that was introduced in California in 2008, but it got killed very quickly because we did not have enough understanding of what EPR was. and there was not enough elevated conversation about it. And so nobody thought twice about it. And then we just kind of moved on to product by product. So we're finally circling back, literally 17 years later, to finish the job. So I chaired the Recycling Commission of California. This was the #1 recommendation of the commission. We had to get a 17-0 vote to get that recommendation approved, and it was the easiest one. And the reason, when you have waste haulers and Teamsters and local governments of all kinds and NGOs, we all agreed quickly because these don't have markets. Nobody's got the money to deal with these products, and we're doing our best at the local level, but we just can't get it all. We don't have the information. So we were so excited to hear that Vermont passed the first EPR bill for HHW in 2023. And we're excited to hear from them. So I'm going to keep going so we can get to them. But we did see that there's an ALS risk for that disease that takes people so young from HHW being in your garage. That study just came out recently. So this has already gotten through 2 committees. We thank all those that supported it. We want to thank those legislator champions for us. So if you want to watch those hearings, those are the links there. Next slide, please. And again, I find those very, very interesting. This is the support we have. And I can tell you that this bill was completed later than the marine flare bill, which is why it was harder for us to get the support, because people have processed to get letters of support in. This is going to have a huge amount of support as well as the word gets out. So again, there's a support letter if you're interested in joining us. Next slide, please. So the next steps for both of these bills is that we're working with the Department of Toxic Substances Control on technicals. They're asking us questions in the author's office. We're meeting with opposition, different businesses that have concerns. There'll be amendments, but we've got to get out of Appropriations Committee, and that committee hearing is on the 16th of May. So hopefully we can get through this process this year and finally deal with this, because I've heard some people say, well, we need to focus on the finishing packaging. But the truth is, when your packaging is contaminated with household hazardous waste, it's probably contaminated, and it's raising the cost of sorting for that packaging. So let's get this dealt with once and for all. Next slide, please. So this is the suspense hearing will be on the 16th. These are the members on that committee. Next slide, please. We'll just find out if it gets out then on the 16th. And these are all our contact information. So you might want to take a picture of this slide if you'd like to contact any of the speakers. And I want to thank them all for being here today. And we should probably move on to our next speaker. And again, if you haven't joined us already, please do. This is hard work. Follow us on social media. But my goal is that, as soon as possible, nothing hits the market that doesn't have an end-of-life plan. And that's what we shoot for. So with that, I will turn it, and thank you to all of our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you all. Stop Waste, LA San, so many. Thank you so much. Next slide. So now we'll turn it over to Leslie Lukash with Zero Waste Sonoma, our co-sponsor on the flare bill. And she also has hazardous waste facilities and been a great supporter on 1143. So thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, my pleasure. I just thought I'd provide an overview of what it's like to operate a household hazardous waste facility in a jurisdiction, and as well as the costs and why we support EPR for HHW so much. So with that, next slide. Just a little bit of background of who we are. We are a joint powers authority, and we represent 10 member jurisdictions in Sonoma County. Our population that we serve is roughly 500,000 people. Our agency is funded through tip fees, and we make sure that all of our jurisdictions are in compliance with solid waste recycling and HHW legislation and policy that comes at either the local or state level. Next. So for those who may not be fully aware of what is household hazardous waste, here is a look at material types that we manage both in the home, in the yard, and your workshop. There's things like asbestos batteries, bug spray, fluorescent light bulbs, fertilizers, propane tanks, batteries, auto batteries, brake fluids, oil filters. So these are materials that we manage through our HHW facility. Next. We currently operate one permanent site. It's where the red star is. That's where our facility is. But you can kind of see where that red star is located in comparison to the population of our county and how, it's in the southern part of our county. What we do is we have the permanent site as well as events every Tuesday located somewhere to collect HHW materials throughout our county. So those are the green dots, and you can see the numbers inside of the green dots is the number of collection events we do. So you can see in Cloverdale, which is our northernmost city, we do 4 events there just because the residents at that location are located so far away from our permanent location. And we also do rover pickups. That's an on-call service that is $50 to request a rover or a vehicle to come pick up materials. But just so you know, for us to manage all of these materials, it costs our agency roughly $3 million a year to manage the HHW material. Next slide. We also have a reuse locker. That is a location for like new items, items that we receive that maybe are only partially used, like some of the solvents or the paints. And then we in those lockers, residents can come and pick up those items for free. So we promote a reuse of reusable items. And then we also do a collection of electronic waste at our 5 transfer stations throughout the county. And we do monthly events to also help collect e-waste. Next slide. We realized that the facility that we operate, one, is at capacity. We need more capacity for a new HHW site, but also the location of the site isn't really conducive to all the material that we're collecting throughout Sonoma County. So we did an expansion analysis, and what we found is that we really need a second larger site, which would become our main site, in a more central area of our county. So that's where the green circle is on your slide. We're between Santa Rosa and Healdsburg. That's really serving the majority of the population of our community. So we are looking at expanding to that location. Next slide. So the good news is we found a site. It took us about, I'd say, 3 years plus to actually identify a site that we could have this larger facility. We purchased 4 acres. It's right along our major corridor, so it's easy for residents and businesses to locate the site. We have a lot of synergy in terms of the neighboring businesses. It's in an industrial park, and there's a concrete recycler right across the street, metal recycler, construction demolition recycler, all kind of within this industrial park. So it's the right location to do an HHW facility. It's the first time our agency's ever owning property, so this is new to us. We purchased the property, or the sale closed just in January of this year. And this is going to be our larger site with the site down south as a smaller site. To purchase and build, construct, and execute this project, we estimate it's going to be 12 to $14 million. So it's a big expense to our residents to actually get this site going. Next. And this is just a sketch of the site. We hope to have an education center, a boardroom, an education room as well. We need 10,000 feet of warehouse space. And we want to have an actual reuse store from, and you saw in the previous picture, it was more these containers, where we actually want to make a reuse store so it's more attractive to our residents. But there's more materials that are coming out there that we need to manage. So we have to be mindful of that, like solar panels, carpet, mattresses, beverage containers. So we're kind of looking at it as a hub for hard to recycle items. The next slide. So for those reasons, the $3 million cost, the cost to operate, transport, properly process all this HHW material, we realize that the producers of products need to be involved. Heidi mentioned that we're the co-sponsor of SB 1066. Sonoma County has 76 miles of coastline and a large recreational boater population. We currently do not accept flares. We don't have the permit nor the equipment to safely handle marine flares, nor does anybody else in California. There's actually one county in California that has the proper equipment that can actually hold and store the explosives. But the reality is there's only one location out of state for us to manage them properly. So we did a joint collection event for marine flares because we actually, or I should say, yeah, a joint event. We don't accept them, but they end up at our facility. And so we had 2 buckets of marine flares, and we coordinated with 2 other counties to help distribute the cost more equally, make it more cost effective. The marine flares cost $13 a piece to buy, yet it cost us $185 each flare for us to properly transport it and dispose of it. And so that's a cost that's on all the ratepayers. And we believe that cost should be bared more by the producers and those that are actually using the marine flare. So next slide. So we also, our agency has a long-standing history of supporting EPR. We first started passing EPR, or our first EPR resolution was back in 2008, and we support EPR policies that come through our state. And just to give you some context of just costs and why we support EPR for HHW is, we in 2022, 2023, we collected over 1 million pounds of HHW and spent equally over $1 million of contracted labor, transportation, and disposal costs. And that's similar with e-waste. It was, 900,000 pounds of e-waste costing us about $93,000 of contracted labor. So we did propose, we quickly, sold and purchased the property in January of this year for the new site. And the very next month, by design, we proposed to our board that we adopt a model EPR ordinance for our community. Our board was in favor of looking at a EPR model ordinance. So now we're kind of doing the research now that's required to put one together. We're also watching the EPR for HHW at the state level, but we fully support what's happening at the state. But if not, we want to take it on at the local level because we do believe that the producers need to be involved in part of the solution. And we also have done some cost analysis of the savings, and we know it would save us, over $500,000. So with that, this next slide is my last slide. I'm happy to take questions, and there's actually Courtney's information. She's my counterpart at the agency and our HHW program manager. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie and Courtney, for all your help. And we're going to keep moving quickly through these slides so we can, and Vermont is key because they're the ones who went first. So we want to thank Vermont. Bravo for passing the first EPR bill for household hazardous waste. I know it's early days since you passed it, but we're very excited to hear from you. So Josh, are you there?
I'm here, Heidi. Can you hear me?
Can. Perfectly. Thank you for coming. The floor is yours.
All right. Apologies for the frog in my throat. I just got back from lots of travels and conferences and caught a cold along the way. I'm also joined here today by my colleague, Shannon Choquette, who does the real work of this program along with Mia Rothline. There's Shannon. At the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, part of the Agency of Natural Resources. So since we're limited on time, I'm just going to go right to town. So let's go to the next slide. So this is not lost on anybody. Anything that's a product on the shelves becomes a waste that needs management. And waste managers are kind of the canary in the coal mine and rarely have a chance to impact what they're given or affect change on what they're given. And producer responsibility really brings the producer to the table, as we've discussed. But let's keep going. Next slide. Okay, this is a bit complex, and I apologize, but Heidi kind of set us off talking about toxicity, but she also talked about tonnage, talking about packaging EPR, things that are the packaging and organics you see in the bottom of this stacked bar. The stacked bar represents Vermont's waste and different materials found in the waste. Things that make up a lot of tonnage, recyclables, food waste, are no different in our state than they are in the state of California or others. And then things towards the top that are smaller but are more toxic, are those toxic things. So this is just a close, quick version of how we use policy tools, the toolbox Heidi talked about before, to address different materials. And you can see EPRs at the top being used for some of the more toxic materials. We also use product bans. We have a ban on mercury fluorescent light bulbs. Both compact fluorescents cannot be sold into the state, and linear 4-foot fluorescents are now banned from sale in the state of Vermont. And so that will forward the use of LEDs, which have no mercury in them. Next slide. So this isn't a slide of those producer responsibility programs or advanced consumer fee or product stewardship programs that we have in the state of Vermont. They're quite robust and been operating for many years now. One of the newest is the single-use battery law on the far right-hand side. But we really like these programs. They do a lot of good for the state of Vermont. And we tend to be the best in collection per capita. That helps when we have a small population and a motivated one. But it's just an example of the various EPR programs we already have. And now we have HHW EPR. You can go to the next slide and I'll just give you an example. This is a bar chart of one of our newest ones, batteries. These are both charting single-use and rechargeable battery collection with the passage of single-use battery EPR. Note, rechargeables came along as a voluntary piece of it. They're not required to be collected. There is a bill moving through our legislature currently to change that, to add rechargeables batteries to this program, but it has not passed yet. So you can see the progress we've made upon passage of the law around 2015 and its implementation in 2016. These programs get results, is the bottom line. Next slide. All right, so I'm not going to belabor the Vermont history very much, but suffice to say that we have a town just about everywhere and we don't have county government. So you end up with a quasi patchwork quilt of local governments that work on household hazardous waste collection. I think the main thing I want to get across is that you remember I talked about toxicity and tonnage. That's how regulators of waste and waste managers tend to look at the waste stream, through the lens of what is toxic and what's creating a lot of tonnage. The more tonnage you have, the more disposal capacity you need, the more landfills or incinerators you need to build and operate. The more toxic, the more you're going to have to spend on the human health and environmental impacts of that waste. So for 30 years, we have dedicated local resources and state resources to the collection of HHW. And that's really what is kind of propelled us into this realm we find ourselves in now. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so what is HHW? I think people here pretty much know, but the way our law defined it is it's essentially any hazardous waste that would be considered hazardous waste, but for who generated it. So it typically hazardous waste only really applies to business or institution waste and exempts residential waste. That's why we call it household hazardous waste. But this law really says that hazardous waste that is hazardous by our state rules, and our rules are what are referred to in our hazardous waste program, that's what's going to be covered in this law. And I will note that it is generally considered the most toxic part of the solid waste stream. So that's kind of why we're here. Next slide. Okay, so common products, HHW products, they're labeled with this caution, toxic, corrosive. Most people here are pretty familiar with that. These are the common products we see collected in our HHW services that we had for over 30 years. And many of these are covered either through an existing EPR program, like we have paint care. So some paints are already covered in that. And some mercury products are already covered in the mercury thermostat law or the mercury light bulb law, or they're covered now under HHW EPR. Let's go to the next slide. So I think people are probably keenly interested in what is Vermont's law and what does it cover. Let me first say that Vermont's law is written for Vermont. So because we have existing producer responsibility programs, like I mentioned, some things are exempt right away. There's not a double requirement for a mercury lamp manufacturer to also pay into the HHW program. If they're covered in one law, they're exempt from HHW EPR. That said, we talked about gas cylinders. Heidi was mentioning that before. The law, as it was being drafted, there was testimony taken on gas cylinders and their impacts and their high costs and their threat to solid waste managers and the public, and they were looped into the law as well. And by the way, this is 5+ years in the making. There was many iterations of this bill previously before it was passed. But in any case, this is what the law covers. It covers anything defined as hazardous waste, again, but for who generated it. So it's it's going to require that the residential HHW be covered, and it includes definitions of gas cylinders, which we can get into. And then it exempts quite a bit of materials, including pesticides, that are already registered and pay a fee to our Vermont Agency of Agriculture. So again, the law was written for Vermont. It may be different as different states look at this. If we had an existing program in our state for pesticides, I think we can move on for right now. Thanks. All right, so the law passed because, again, it's some of the most toxic form of solid waste. It had a 30+ year history of municipal collection, and Vermont had existing and has existing collection facilities and events around the state. They were operating. They're well established, but the cost had increased as much as 50% for some collection events, at costs we're seeing from $100 to $400 per carload. And it really is a result of sort of the classic post-COVID shrinking pool of service providers, supply chain issues, and just general inflation of prices being charged. So these municipalities were facing tough decisions on whether to charge more to the public for doing the right thing. And we know that that can result in more disposal or hiding HHW in their trash, or worse, leaving it in households or garages or sheds, or leaking to the environment, endangering, people, pets, children in their homes and properties. And I will mention that it was discussed at the legislature that the law may support less toxic alternatives. People argue that these types of laws can increase the costs of some products. Generally, the legislators who were discussing this said, well, maybe that's okay because we should prioritize less toxic alternatives, and that would be a help. So I mentioned that as some of the things that were discussed as the law passed. Next slide. So this is just one example of costs over time at one local solid waste group, a group of towns that pools resources to offer household hazardous waste collection events in the spring, in June. And you can see how these costs have grown from 2018 to 2022. They're basically going up. That's the major takeaway here. Next slide. All right, so some specifics to just get into. The Vermont law does contain a stop sale. It's a provision that if you are selling into the state and you're not participating as part of a stewardship organization, or as some people call it, the producer responsibility organization, you cannot sell your product. And we have been successful in issuing stop sales on other programs. By the way, this law has not taken effect yet. I mean, it's passed, but it hasn't had a deadline date go into effect, which is currently, as the law stands, registration for the stewardship organization takes effect January 1, 2025. There is some movement in the legislature to consider moving that to give more time for industry. That is moving as we speak through the state government process. The law allows multiple nonprofit stewardship organizations after the first collection plan. The first one requires one stewardship organization. So testimony was given that this is a wide variety of products. And I think this is why Heidi was talking about earlier producer responsibility programs focused on single product type, like marine flares. It's a little bit easier to initiate something like that. Packaging EPR is an example of multiple different producers that are hard to organize. But this would require one stewardship organization during the first collection plan, which is up to 5 years. And then the law only ever allows one collection plan. So even after we get multiple stewardship organizations, the law was written to require that they collaborate to submit one collection plan. So that might be new for some folks, but it makes it more digestible, I guess, or easier to understand and implement for the state on the regulatory side. It requires free statewide collection from covered entities, which is any person who presents. It's not just a residential or a business law. It's any person who presents covered HHW products, and requires statewide community collection. So all municipalities are covered for their collection, processing, and end-of-life management, including facility costs, equipment, labor, maintenance, event costs, contractor costs, and supplies. That's quite a descriptive list. It also requires public outreach and education, and 2 public awareness surveys, and then a method of disposition following a reduce, reuse, recycle, dispose hierarchy. We know that a lot of this won't be recycled, but we hope that where it can, that can be pursued. And it requires a performance goal, collection performance goal, initially of 5% of households that participate per year. A&R is required to report to the legislature on a proposed registration fee. We did submit a memo requesting or recommending basically a reimbursement model with a budget approval by the legislature. We have not heard back on that yet. And it includes a landfill ban, or some call it a disposal ban, on covered household hazardous products after the collection program has been established. So we didn't talk in the policy toolbox about landfill bans, but they don't exactly create a way to get rid of something. You just say you can't throw it away. So this establishes that after the program is in place. Next slide. Okay, so that's really about it. I will mention that when you read a product and it says check locally for disposal options for this toxic product, essentially the product is pointing you to your municipality or your local government to handle it responsibly. And so I think it's this law is really about bringing the producer to the table in a conversation. So Heidi, I will leave it there. I know we're tight on time.
That was perfect. What a great overview, Josh. Thank you so much. And again, the leadership coming out of Vermont is incredible. For such a small state with a low population, you've been able to do amazing things, and we're very, very grateful. So we'll have to move quickly. We want to make sure we get Manny in here, because Manny runs the EPR programs for household hazardous waste in much of Canada. So Manny, why don't you tell us how it's working there, and how Product Care also has done some work here in the United States as well, including our thermostat program here in California. And I think you helped start Pink Care.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to National Stewardship Action Council and NAMA for inviting me to present today. My name is Manny Chung. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Product Care Association. I was asked to provide a short presentation to share some insights into Product Care's experience related to household hazardous waste, extended producer responsibility programs. And so we'll do that and recognizing the timelines that we have for this call. So next slide, please. Yeah, so Product Care is a not-for-profit industry association that is really meant to be responsible producer responsibility organization. We originally started in 1994. We're a little unique compared to other pros in the sense that we manage multiple different product categories. And so we operate EPR programs across Canada. Our main core products are the paint, lighting products, smoke alarm and carbon monoxide alarms, HHW material, as we're talking about. So we're actually celebrating, happy to say, 30 years of EPR success this year. So next slide, please. So in addition to the 4 core products that we've mentioned previously, we've also had EPR experiences in other product categories, including supporting mattress EPR in the States. We've dabbled in electronics in the past, outdoor electrical power equipment, major appliances, and small appliance power tools. And as Heidi mentioned previously, the Mercury Thermostat Care Program in California. Next slide, please. So this slide here is just give you a bit of a visual picture of all the various EPR programs that Product Care operates in Canada. And as you note in the left-hand corner there's a couple in the US that we're supporting or being involved in. The icons really represent the different type of programs. Paint HHW is the one. HHW is the one is in orange. You'll note that most of the country is in blue, which is meaning that they've got EPR programs now. You see Yukon and Alberta, which are going to be coming forth in 2025 with specifically EPR for HHW. Next slide, please. And just to pull back from all the other EPR programs we operate, this gives you a clear snapshot of the types, which jurisdictions have HHW EPR programs. So you can see that there's currently 7 regulated and 2 to implement for next year. Something of really noteworthy is that while we have EPR regulations across these jurisdictions, there is no harmonization. The scope of products that are regulated varies by province. For example, in Quebec, you'll see that it's just regulated for the compressed gas cylinders that Heidi was mentioning about previously, whereas Saskatchewan, Manitoba has a larger scope of products, and we'll touch base on that if we skip to the next slide, please. So this gives you a real overlay of the programs. You can see that the first program in Canada for HHW EPR started in 1997. And you look at how many years that it's taken for us to get from 1 program to 7 programs. It's a long time. And so, that's really speaking to that it's not an easy product to regulate and under EPR, and it's taken some time for the various jurisdictions to get to that. The other thing of note is the way products are classified. It's challenging, and again, what this table is trying to show you is lack of harmonization. Some jurisdictions regulate based on technical specifications, like for flammable liquids, a flash point. Others are using a CSA standard. Again, that is a bit more technical and things like that. But in recent times, we're seeing more shift towards labeling, making it easier to understand throughout the supply chain, from manufacturers to distributors, to importers, to retailers, to the consumer. You'll see the list of the specific product categories that are captured by each of the programs. Like I said, the most comprehensive one is Manitoba and Saskatchewan, which looks to be surpassed by Yukon in 2025. British Columbia, while they were the original ones to start, they are looking at currently to amend the regulations to expand beyond the 3 products that are listed here, which is flammable liquids, pesticides, and gasoline. In general, what we've seen that works very well for HHW programs, if they are managed in combination with paint, that's our Canadian experience, and I know it's different in the US. So that's what we're being, dealing with and experiencing in Canada, is this kind of bit of a patchwork, if you want to call it, in terms of how they're regulated, what products are regulated, in which jurisdictions, and those type of requirements. So next slide, please. So I'd like to share some trends and challenges that we've observed based on our experience with EPR HHW in Canada. One of the things that you'll note that I mentioned before is the terminology is even changing. Traditionally, they're called household hazardous waste. Now the new regulations are switching more towards hazardous and special products, because technically no one sells hazardous waste. People sell hazardous products. And so that's the part of the rationale for changing the language around. We're starting to see the impetus of expanding HHW EPR programs in other jurisdictions in Canada, but also the existing programs or jurisdictions that have EPR regulations are looking to expand the scope of products. From an industry side, we're seeing the manufacturing and formulations to be switching to more eco-friendly formulations, which in case some of those products would no longer be captured by technical definitions, which means that the programs we operate are going to have some impacts to it from a revenue standpoint. And as I mentioned before, the general trend is moving towards classification by product labeling as opposed to technical or standards and things like that. I think most folks on this call understand that HHW sales or hazardous and special product sales are not as big as some of the other regulated EPR programs. So there's managing HHW, there's a lack of economies of scales in general. And previous slide noted the non-uniformity, and I won't get into too much of that. The other aspect that is kind of different from other EPR programs is for this material, this group of material, there's very limited management options for them. In case of pesticides, you really can only incinerate because, the older pesticides has more nastier products, if I can call that, in there, and we certainly don't want that still in circulation. And so there are very limited number of material management options once you collect some of these materials. Adds complexity because there's a variety of array of products, and even within the specific product type, a variety of formulations and things like that. And one of the biggest things, as most people probably understand, is unlike any other EPR program, there is overlaying additional regulations and laws that apply to the management of HHW material that you don't see in maybe paper and packaging or beverage containers or even tires and things like that. So that's a huge consideration when we look at dealing with HHW programs. And the other thing is HHW, if you're using a funding model of environmental handling fees, much like paint care, there needs to be a recognition of the fact that these products generally have a very low price point. I meant earlier presentation, someone mentioned the cost of flares and the potential fee is going to be small relatively the price of the product type of thing like that. That's not what we typically see in HHW. So next slide, please. So again, no harmonization across the jurisdictions, whether it's scope or definitions. Designating HHW is a very challenging process. There's a number of different variety of industry folks in there that aren't necessarily related to one another.
Manny, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to like 30 seconds maybe.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I won't repeat, just to key on, there's lack of suitable infrastructure. One thing that we'll notice is the tight insurance markets causing challenges for increasing accessibility or collection sites. So just a summary of considerations. Not all EPR programs are equal. HHWs require special consideration. HHW programs are high complexity compared to other EPR programs. Many different industries involved in HHW, non-uniformity, collection infrastructure requires time to develop and enhance, and ease of communication throughout the supply chain is very difficult to achieve. And if any consideration for performance metrics, they need to be practical and reasonable. And recovery rates, etc., are not appropriate measures. So yeah, and the key thing is when you're planning for an HHW program, recognize what existing infrastructure or what the current collection systems are in place. And last slide. So thank you. And
That's
there's my contact
fantastic.
information.
We've got 2 minutes. So I just want to say thank you to our speakers. We're trying to do this a little bit fast just to kind of get the information out and get your questions, which we can answer after the webinar as well. But I learned a lot, and I know that Jordan, we need to be talking to Manny also about the legislation because he has so much important information for us. But as you can see, this is a big category. There's a lot of moving parts. These are all the, and Shannon again works with Josh. So you've got contacts for 2 people in Vermont, Manny and Senator Blake Spear and Leslie and us. If you have ideas on our bill and you want to give us information, we'd be thrilled to get that. Jordan and I are available for that. And I hope you found this helpful. This is the beginning of the movement to get household hazardous waste under EPR in the United States. Vermont kicked it off, and we've done these one-off bills in different states, but I think it's time. We've heard from at least one of the hazardous waste haulers that they're not weighing in on the bill except to say, please only give us one pro because when they have to deal with multiple pros and all these different one-off programs, the reporting and the administration costs go up. So that's just something to think about, and why we've started our bill with only one pro for what's left of the HHW world. And I see we had 74 people on the call today. I want to thank you all and see if there's any more comment in the chat. I'm not seeing any more questions. Great information has been shared. I hope you found this valuable. We'll be sending this out to those who were on the recording, and also happy to share the slide deck as well. So with that, I think we are at time, and I will say thank you again to NAMA, our great partnership with NAMA. And if you haven't joined us, one of us, please consider it. This is how we stay funded to do this important work. So thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the webinar.